All right.
Okay.
Do you want to kick things off, or would you like me to?
No, you go ahead. You can introduce yourself and what you're going
Okay.
to do today. Yes.
All right. Well, hi everyone in the room and out there in internet world. I guess you can you see me on this big screen that you're looking off? Okay, perfect. So I'll just stare at the side of everyone's head. My name is there we go. My name is Alison Groves. I take care of our community and handle partnerships at a company called Zapier. And Zapier is a what's the best way to preface this before I explain to you what Zapier actually is? So we take all of the apps that you use in your daily life, from email to project management to websites to accounting, task management, all these things that you use. We've all got them on our phones, our computers, whatever it might be, and we use what I'm going to talk about today, APIs, to connect all that together. So instead of you having to be a programmer or know anything about code or data, we allow you to kind of take all this information and connect it to each other, so you can send any information between two applications that you might want to. So we hope that it helps people cut out all the tedious work that you do in your life, whether it's transferring data from one thing to another, keeping things, maybe your contacts in sync with your tasks, and all these other things that you do that are very, very tedious. In 2014, we calculated that we saved people 9.8 million hours worth of work. So it's a lot of things that just kind of happen behind the scenes, and we help connect the dots so you don't have to worry about it. So that's Zapier and what I do. And Stacy, do you want me to just kick right into the presentation?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. We are trying something a little new. So if this doesn't work quite right, I will, I'm sure, kind of kick myself for that. But let's see. We practiced this, so it's never going to work exactly the way that it's supposed to when you actually do it live. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so Stacy asked me to come today to talk about APIs, and APIs are actually something, and this is going to be very, very high level, so I apologize if anyone in the room actually has some familiarity with APIs. I've tried to keep this as easy as I can, because it's a pretty easy concept on the surface, but there's a lot of sort of nuts and bolts and bells and whistles, so we like to kind of make sure that that we kind of break it down as easily as we can. But APIs are basically what makes a lot of the internet run. There's so much that we couldn't do data-wise, work-wise, whatever that might be, if we didn't have APIs. And so we at Zapier actually put a course together, or a learn document, a book, if you will, about APIs. And so I'm kind of like just scratching the surface of what we have created in this book. But at the very end, I'll point you in the right direction, and if you want to dig in, learn a little bit more, we've even put together like interactive things that you can do to kind of hands-on teach yourself, or kind of just get an idea of how this stuff kind of all works behind the scenes. But I imagine every one of you in this room has actually interacted with APIs on a pretty regularly basis, especially if you use a smartphone, if you use any sort of app out there, and we even, we would consider even something as ubiquitous as Facebook, to be an app. So if you've ever wondered how all these apps you use are able to get data or information from one place to another, that's what APIs are. So the best example, or the easiest example I could give, is, like Instagram. How is Instagram photos, how do those get over to Facebook? And when you use Evernote, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Evernote. Like if you leave an Evernote note for yourself on your desktop, how does it automatically get over to your phone or sync up with your phone? So this is a perfect example, right? Like this is my Facebook page, and I've connected my Instagram account to Facebook. And with the push of a button, when I'm publishing to Instagram, I push the button to sync it to Facebook, and it automatically is just sent there. And so that happens through this sort of back-end system called APIs. So anything that you do out there on the web, or I shouldn't say anything because that's not the fairest of statements, but any real interaction that you're having with data, especially when you have it in one place and you're getting it to another, so app to app, desktop to phone, anything like that, that's all actually powered through a system that we call through APIs. But it's not something, and I think rightfully so, it's not, APIs aren't designed for us to think about, right? So we don't think about, when I published Instagram, I don't think about, or when I published to Facebook, I'm sorry, I don't think about what I'm doing or what's powering that, I just do it. And so the API kind of exists at a level that none of us, unless we're computer programmers, and even then sometimes we don't really necessarily want to deal with, but it lives on this level underneath everything else that we do to allow us to have this data interact with each other in a myriad of different ways. So API actually stands for Application Programming Interface. Or, you know, if we want to de-nerd that, if you will, for you and for me, basically, like I said, how one program or app talks, or, you know, as we would say, programming-wise, interfaces with another. So that's what API stands for, and again, is really sort of the backbone of the internet these days, and allows us to kind of move whatever data we would want from one app to another, barring the fact that they have an API. And there's actually a lot of apps and web programs out there that don't have APIs, but it's becoming more and more and more ubiquitous, and it's really sort of since the inception really of the smartphone and having different platforms that we use. So our laptop, our desktop, our smartphone, whatever that might be, this is sort of giving us all this power to move this data around. And so breaking it down, it's actually a pretty simple concept. But everything in an API is data, right? So instead of, when you look at a website, you know, you know what buttons to click, you see images, you understand what's happening there. And an API is really just data. It's one computer talking to another, but that computer can edit and view that data just like you can edit and view or work with a website. So instead of passing data through sort of a pretty, you know, system that you can interface with, the API just passes the information straight from one thing to another, from computer to server, from computer to smartphone, whatever that might be. So just think of it almost as like raw data that that your eye doesn't have to process, that just another computer has to process. And this whole thing kind of came about because, and is really like the whole basis of Zapier. What might take you or I hours and hours and hours to do, an API can handle in seconds, because again, it's just passing data from one thing to another. So let's say I had a spreadsheet. Or I'll take a step back. This is an example I'll use throughout the whole thing here. If you have a form, so if you're using a form, and we all use forms, we put forms on our websites. You know, if you're doing WordPress stuff, you're probably really familiar with Gravity Forms. Woohoo is a big form. There's tons and tons of different form options out there. And so many people actually grab and gather information through forms. So you put a form on your website, but then you're kind of just left with all that data. So what would take you, you know, maybe before we could import and export, entering things by hand. So if you had all this form information that you wanted to get into an Excel spreadsheet, you would have to just enter it by hand. Well, now the computer or the API can actually do that for you. So what it would take us, you know, hours to sit there and process, because we're just human, manually entering in information, the API can basically send one thing to another, and it happens instantaneously because it's just that one computer talking to the other. So in concept, this is what that looks like, right? So we have I'm sure you're all familiar with servers. I think I overheard someone say that you're at GoDaddy, so you're probably very, very familiar with servers. But essentially, you know, it's just a big computer with data. That's one part of the API. And then you have your app or your website or your other interface at the other. And so I'm sure so many of you are familiar with anytime you refresh anything, maybe when you're, you know, using Facebook and you sort of swipe down to refresh it, or, you know, if you are getting new email, or however you interact with your phone, anytime you refresh that, that is actually going out and having that API go out to that other big computer and say, I need new information, bring me back new information. And that's actually all happening via the API, because that's how the big computer is communicating with the smaller computer, whether that's your phone, your desktop, etc. So all the data lives in one place. We just need to go ask for it and have the big computer bring it back to us. And so there's many different ways that an API actually can sort of like break this information down. I'm going to try not to get too technical here, because to be honest, there'll be a certain point where even it kind of goes beyond my scope of knowledge, because it gets really, really technical in a lot of places. But at its core, I think it's really important to kind of understand how the process works, because, you know, it'll just kind of give you a really good idea of how that information is making it around from one app to another, from your phone to your desktop, etc. So there's 4 sort of basic commands of an API: a get, a post, a put, and a delete. And this is really, and if there's any developers in the room who are snickering at this, I apologize. It's a very, very sort of basic general idea of how this works. But it kind of goes down the list here. And my teammate who actually put all this information together in this book makes the analogy of ordering a pizza, and it's really, really awesome. So hopefully you guys will check that out at some point if you wanted to like dig in a little deeper to this. So I'm going to try and do that from the best of my memory here. But the very first thing is what we call a get, and these are all actually in capital letters on purpose. This is sort of like the language of an API. So the get is the very first thing. So you know, for example, that would be you on your phone working with an app, and you're like, I need new information. I'm going to go get new information. So that's me telling my computer in my hand or on my lap or on my desk to go out and talk to the bigger computer that I need something new. So that's the get from the API. That's the very first call that it makes. The second thing that happens is, okay, so we're going to take that information and we're actually going to post it over to that other app. So in our Instagram example, basically saying, I'm going to take that photo from Instagram and post it to Facebook. And I know that that's almost a literal language interpretation, but that is what it is. So we're going to, once we get that information, we've gone out, we found that there's something new, we're going to get it, and then we're going to post it over to the place where we requested it. So like Evernote, for example, when maybe we left a note on our laptop, and now we want to get it on our phone. So the app goes out and makes a GET request to get that new information, and then to post it over onto my phone. A put, which in our world we don't see a terrible amount, but I know that it's used a lot, actually allows you to sort of update or edit that. So in our pizza analogy, that like I said, my teammate makes really, really well, and it's a very fun read. We're basically like, we're ordering a pizza online. We would be posting that we wanted to order that pizza. So when I submit my order to Domino's, that is me posting my order to Domino's for them to make my pizza. And if I want to make any changes to it, like, oh shoot, I forgot to add the pepperoni, or I don't really want that crust, I'm going to make a change to it, that's a put. So we go out, we find that original request that we put in. So we found our original pizza order and we make an update to it. We say, actually, we want to do this. So that's a totally different portion of the API process, but allows you to sort of edit or update any existing information that you might have already created. And then a delete clearly is very straightforward. I think that in the pizza analogy, my buddy Brian said, you know, if you wait 45 minutes for your pizza and doesn't show up, you're going to delete it. And that's, you know, essentially what it is. So we're going to go out and delete that. So that's kind of the nerdy core of how an API operates. But I think, you know, like I said, when you break it down in pretty simple terms, it's pretty easy to understand. Have new information. I want to go out and get it. I want to post it to something else, whether we're literally posting it to Facebook or we're posting it to our phone from our laptop, etc. And this is just a simple sort of very, very simple example that we drew out for this book. So if we think of ourselves as the client, so whether that client is a person making that request, but in reality it's just some sort of computer, right? So again, the phone, the laptop, the desktop, whatever. We're going to send a request out to the server, the bigger computer where all of the information is, and then that server is going to return to us what we requested. So that get is that send request, and then that post is that return request. So the big server can handle all of that data and all that information. And we can go out and just request just the little bit of it that we want and have it bring it back to us. And this is really like the straightforward, very, very general view of how an API works in this one image. So you know, we have something that we want, and we go ask for it, and then hopefully 9 times out of 10 that server has that information that we want and brings it back to us and puts it in a place where we're looking for it. And I know that this is not technically part of an API, although I guess it can be. I've seen plenty of these in my day, but you know, I'm sure all of you have seen a 404 not found page. So the same thing happens in an API. Essentially, instead of it returning when you hit a website that maybe doesn't exist or a page that doesn't exist, that's essentially the API saying, or the big computer saying, that doesn't exist. And this happens in the API world a lot. So when I make a GET request to go get information, sometimes I might get back a 404 or some other sort of 400 error, which basically is telling me, the human, or more importantly, me, the computer, that what I've requested doesn't exist. So I get this error knowing that it does not know what I have asked for because that doesn't exist. So that's just another way to kind of visualize it. Whenever you get that 404 page on a website, same concept. If I went to go fetch something on my phone and connect it to something, you know, I might get an error back. And that is literally that big computer saying what you're looking for just doesn't exist. Okay, so we've kind of like covered the very, very high level bits of it, you know, where we are asking the big computer to give us some information. The big computer is saying, okay, here it is. I'm going to put it where you've asked me to put it. But I thought, you know, just for kicks, we might break it down just a little bit on a technical level, just so you get some idea of like what might be happening. And to be honest, this is about as technical as I get myself. So I thought it'd be fun exercise for everyone. So as of now, although this is changing very, very rapidly, there are 2 main languages of an API, so computer languages, so to speak, and these things change so rapidly. New ones are coming around the bend all the time. Older ones are kind of going away, and we're actually seeing a lot of this even here with these 2. So these are the 2 main sort of computer languages of an API. So we have what's called JSON, and that's how we pronounce it, and then or XML. And XML is kind of the older version of that. But JSON is the newer, more worked with version of sort of the API computer language. So this is what XML looks like, and I imagine this probably looks pretty familiar to a lot of you because essentially it's just HTML. Or it is a HTML-esque formatted thing. And I actually prefer working with XML only because I'm so old that HTML is something that I have just grown up working with. So this makes sense to me. You know, it's And this is, again, the whole book that and lesson we've put together is all about ordering pizza. So that's what you'll see here. So we have our open and our closing order. So we know that this whole thing, because it says order and then we close that order here, we know that this encompasses the entire order. And then we start with the crust. So we have that open and close. We have the toppings, and we have a status call. But this is what XML looks like. And this is, we don't see a terrible lot of this anymore. It's starting to phase out a little bit as JSON becomes more prevalent. But to me, this is the more human one to read and understand, especially if you have any basic HTML skills at all. So this is XML. And then this is its bigger brother, JSON. So again, a little bit like you can still you still understand what's happening here. It's just a little bit. It's like my brain can't quite comprehend it. I'm so used to that sort of really straightforward HTML when it opens, it closes. But this is what the data looks like underlying on so many APIs these days. And so this basically is saying this is all of the information that I have asked for. So when I place my pizza order through the Domino's website, this is actually the data that it sends to its bigger computer or server to fulfill that order. So it's using this as its API, or part of its API, and this is what when I fill out a form, this is the raw data that it looks like, or what that raw data looks like, I'm sorry, and then sends that on to the big computer. So it's a little JSON's a little intimidating. Staring at it too long just makes me a little crazy, but I figured it'd be a fun little exercise to look at it. So I imagine that a lot of you, or most of you in the room, are actually pretty familiar with ways that you actually interact with APIs, because I wanted to show what this looks like to you, the user, because I'm sure you have interacted with it all the time and actually didn't know that that's what you were doing. I think, like I said, on a very surface level, that sort of Instagram to Facebook is a classic example of that. But there's two different ways, and this is changing, but there's two things that you might be really, really familiar with when you are using an API but might not know it. The first part here is authentication. So if you're using, and I'm trying to think of the most ubiquitous example of this. Twitter's probably a really good one. But anytime you're using a service and you want to connect that service to something else, so like if you're using Twitter inside of something, or again, we're always going back to the Facebook example. If you are connecting something else like Instagram or however you like to post to Facebook, if you're connecting that to Facebook, you've probably, while you're inside that app, had to have connected your Facebook account to that other account. And this is a really popular way to do that. So when you enter your username and password of that app, so here we're looking at Basecamp, this is what we call authentication, and this is basically the underlying part of how the API works. So what you're doing is you're authorizing one app to talk to another. So underlying all that is the actual API. So all of the data, all of your Basecamp data, and all of your Facebook data, and all of your Evernote data, and all of that kind of lies underneath and can be retrieved via that API. And so you, the user, just have to authenticate and say, yes, I give X app permission to speak to Y app. And so, like I said, I imagine you've done this so many times, didn't even think about it. But when you connect one app to another with your username and password, that's called authentication, and that is the basis of an API connection. The other way that you can go about doing this is an API key. So I think we see kind of 50-50 with this, but we're connected to so many different apps out there that it's really, really different. But you may have times where there's an app that you use that actually generates, and you can see that down here, this long string of letters and numbers that I'm sure you've dealt with before. That's basically a unique key for your account. So just like you would authenticate with your username and password, this is just another way to authenticate your account. So you're basically saying, I give, again, X app permission to access Y app, and this is how I'm going to do it. So I know this API key is specific to my account, and the computer knows that this long string of letters and numbers is my account, and it knows to go retrieve the information when asked for that is associated with my account, because again, it identifies with this long sort of string of numbers here. So when you are maybe connecting one app to another, sometimes it might ask you for your API key, which, you know, that one app will generate, you put it in the other app, and then they're connected together. So those are the two ways that you probably interact with. Clearly, if you're using this method, you are a little more aware they're using an API. When you do this authentication and you're just using your username and password, it's a little more subtle, so you're not necessarily aware. But that's exactly what's happening. Everything that we talked about leading up to this, once that connection has happened, that's how that all sort of interacts with each other. So there's all this data out there. Our accounts have so much data, and now that we know kind of how it works, we have to figure out how it's retrieved. So there's two different distinct ways that an API will actually give you, the other computer, whatever it might be, the data. So there's polling, which is the more sort of standard way of doing it. So basically, it's like that example that I showed. Let me go back to the slide because the photo's too good. This one. So when I poll, and this is a pretty technical term in the API world, we're basically saying I'm going to poll this server to send me back data. So every so often, the one computer will go out and poll the bigger computer for data. In the same way that Facebook refreshes when you open it, Twitter refreshes when you open it, Evernote, any other app that you use, when it refreshes, that's basically it polling the server for new information. So that's the far more used version of how an API grabs data. And again, it's all this sort of underlying process. It's saying, I'm going to send this request, I'm going to poll this computer for data, then it's going to send it back to me. There's a newer, let me get back to the slide here. There's a newer version of this same sort of concept, but it's called webhooks. And so what happens, and it's really, really interesting, and sometimes I even have a hard time visualizing it because it's so, it's almost too easy. So it makes visualizing it a little difficult. But what's nice about webhooks is it's basically the newer way of asking for information. So you can put, webhook is basically a very unique URL, and you would put it into an application that you were using. So any app that you would be using will give you, if it supports it. This is a very new concept. We don't have that many apps. Wufoo, if you're familiar with Wufoo, they're probably one of the more widely known apps that uses webhooks. So basically, you can connect two apps together with a unique URL, and instead of going out and asking a server for data, that unique URL is going to automatically see that there's something new and send it instantaneously. So instead of us having to go out and constantly ask if there's more data, every 5 minutes, you got something new, you got something new, you got something new. The webhook actually just connects to that really specific URL, and anytime anything is new, it basically is associated with that URL and automatically sends it over. It's not the easy, like I said, it's not the easiest thing in the world to visualize, and it's even harder to explain and diagram, but just think of it as instead of going out and asking for that information, we already have it, and it just automatically sends it along. So it's a lot quicker than, again, going out and constantly sort of polling or pinging that server to ask for data. So broken down in our pizza analogy, we can kind of like very easily visualize how that sort of goes from beginning to end. And this is what polling is. So it's making that sort of constant or regimented or scheduled ping to that server to get a status. So so we ask the server first, you know, and then we'll come back with, okay, that's your order has been placed. And then we ask it again for maybe an update, and it comes back and says, okay, the status is cooking. And we ask it again, and it comes back, and this happens over and over and over again until we get new information. So I imagine that you have had times when you have refreshed Facebook or refreshed Twitter and there's actually no new data, or refreshed your email. That's basically you asking the server to send you new information, and when they come back and there's no information, it's just like nothing happened. So you can go out and ask that server, you know, many, many times, you know, bring me new data, bring me new data, bring me new data. And it's only going to give you back new data when there is new data to give you. But just so to kind of equate that polling to an action that you probably do daily and don't think about, it's just like that. Any sort of app that you might try and update, again, Twitter, Facebook, email, anything like that. If you make a request, you want to see something new and there's nothing there, again, that's that sort of polling, that asking for information. And that's really the underlying basis of APIs, is that sort of constant, regimented asking for new data, and either returning data to you or not returning data to you. So that is APIs in a very, very high level nutshell. If you want to dig deeper and read on the subject, like I said, my teammate Brian, who's actually a developer but a very, very good writer, put together this whole ebook. We'll call it Introduction to APIs. That's the URL there. If it's a little hard to read, it's zapier.com/learn/APIs. And the cool thing about this book, which I've actually read cover to cover many times, because every time I read it, I retain something new and learn something new. At the end of every chapter, I believe it's about 8 chapters, there is an exercise to do, and it basically takes the chapter and breaks it down into what you've learned, and then allows you to sort of physically see it in action. And I believe it sticks along that pizza analogy, so you can, every chapter you can kind of like go one step further in ordering the pizza, but it's a little interactive activity to do, so you can kind of like put that learning into practice. It's really, really fun. Like I said, I do it pretty frequently. So if any of this is of interest to you at all, and you want to dig deeper, maybe learn a little bit more, like I said, I just kind of scratched the surface for the basis of this, not to get too boring or too technical. Go there, check it out. This is the cover for it. It's kind of cute. It's a really, really fun, good way to kind of learn a little bit more. And Brian's really good about knowledge sharing and things like that. So that's a good segue to what we do. And Stacy asked me to do a little bit on Zapier, but I really want to do this as it relates to APIs, to kind of bring everything that we were just talking about into something that makes sense. Because Zapier, like I said, I believe the count was just over 450 different applications, web apps, that you probably most likely use at least one of those 450 on a daily basis. And so we take all of the data from those apps and help you connect them together. So instead of you having to learn way more about APIs and learning how to program and code, we have built the backbone of that and allow you to just connect your apps together, and then basically do everything that we just talked about, but let us handle that, and you not have to deal with any of that at all. So in Zapier world, just like in the API world, it's like something happens in one app, and Zapier sees that and then performs that action in the second app. So going back to our Instagram analogy, it's the exact same thing. So if you post a photo to Instagram and you choose to post that to Facebook, That's actually Facebook's API recognizing that an event has happened in Instagram, and then performs that task, which in that specific instance is posting that photo from Instagram to Facebook. So it's the exact same concept across the board. It's basically, again, just making that, that API request and then fulfilling that somewhere else. Excuse me just a second. So this is kind of a breakdown of what that looks like inside of Zapier. And you can, the sky's the limit as far as this is concerned. There's over 2 million, so it's 450 apps. There's over 2 million permutations of this. So you can do just about anything you want. And again, it's all that underlying concept of when one thing happens in one app, I'm going to go look for changes or new items, and then I'm going to send them over to another app. But I don't have to program that. I'm just looking at it in Zapier. So what this looks like in Zapier is, if we're going to stick with, again, I talked about forms earlier because I imagine a lot of you use forms on your website. So the core of Zapier and the core of APIs is this sort of relationship. So when this happens, when I have a new entry on a form, this other thing is going to happen. It's going to create the spreadsheet row. So that example can be really anything that you can think of. Like I said, we're over the 2 million mark of different things that you can do. But this is like such an easy way to break it down. But this is not the only thing you can do. Anything that you can really think of, you can probably accomplish. But it's just a matter of thinking of it along those lines and along the line of the API. So like I said, when I have a specific thing happen, I'm going to go look for those changes. And then if I find a new change, I'm going to perform a task or an action. So when someone fills out my form, I'm going to use that data underneath in Wufoo to go out and ask for that new data and then to post it over to a Google spreadsheet. So this is almost the sort of easy visualization of an API saying, when this one thing happens, we're going to do this. So when I'm going to go out to get that data, and then I'm going to post that data. And so as far as Zapier is concerned, we need to do a couple of things to kind of get an idea of what you might be looking for. Because I'm sure you can imagine that, think about your Facebook account or think about any other account that you have or app that you have and the amount of data that you might have in it. You probably don't want all of that flying around willy-nilly all the time. So we break it down to make these API requests or these data requests. We break them down really granularly so you have control over it. So it's not just this sort of free wheel of data flying around everywhere. You can be very, very specific. So if we're sticking with forms, we're saying, there's one specific form that I want to work with. And when anyone fills out this particular form, I want that data to go somewhere else. So again, instead of, we use Wufoo at Zapier, and I think in our Wufoo account, we probably have over 100 forms. Now, I'm sure you can imagine that if we were looking at all those forms all the time for information, it would just be information overload, right? We need to be really specific about what we're looking for so that we're not just trying to go out and grab hundreds, if not thousands of records all the time. We're being very specific and deliberate with what we're looking at so that we can work with the right data that we want to and get that data in the right spot. The same thing goes for, anything social. You wouldn't want every social account that you have automatically pulling into Facebook, right? You want to really control what you have. So that's the really nice thing about APIs is that they're actually really, really granular when you get down to it. So you can go out and look for just the right specific piece of information and not be worried about getting this barrage or basically everything thrown at you all the time. So when someone posts to this particular form, that is what is going to actually trigger the automation to run. So we're saying anytime anyone fills out this form, I want that information to go to my spreadsheet. So the cool thing about this, as far as it relates to Zapier, is it's really fun to see live information come back to you right, excuse me, in the heat of the moment. So this is just a static image, I'm sure you can see, but when I click on this insert fields button here, I get this drop down, and that is actually live information coming over from my Wufoo account. So that is the last entry on this particular form, and when I hit that button, that is Zapier going over to Wufoo, making that sort of GET request and saying, hey, Wufoo, I need to get all of the information from this particular form sent back over to me. So I do that, and I click on this Insert Fields button, and we go out and we grab all that data, and that is basically that Wufoo's API is giving back to us. And we match it up. So I can match that data up with spreadsheet rows, or spreadsheet rows and columns. So I can match up the first name on a form with the first name column that I have set up in my spreadsheet. And so anytime anyone fills out my form or whatever, this is just a very, very, like I said, high-level example. I can take that very specific piece of information from the data that Wufoo is giving me and match it up to a very specific spot in a spreadsheet. Because again, the Wufoo API is giving me that really granular data, and then the Google Sheets API, like I said, underlying all of this, allows me to put that data in a very specific spot. So it's not just, again, all this data floating around everywhere all the time. It's very specific, it's very granular, and that's what this API allows us to do. We can go get the exact thing we're looking for. We can match it up with the other exact thing where we need it to be. So we go get it, and we post it over to Google Sheets or whatever app you want to send that data to. So I really think this makes a good analogy, just summing up APIs on a whole as it relates to Zapier. So everything that we just looked at was basically the Zapier interface. But instead of you having to think of it in code or think of it like a computer would, we humanize that for you. But the analogy of what an API is actually can be found in the Zapier experience, right? So every 15 minutes, Zapier is going to make a GET request to the trigger app. So if we'll stick with Wufoo, every 15 minutes, or actually Wufoo might not be the best example here because they have webhooks, so it would happen instantly. But we'll stick with it. That's basically saying, okay, every 15 minutes, Zapier is going to go over to Wufoo and look at Wufoo's data and make a GET request. And any new data that's there that didn't exist the last time we did this, we're going to grab. So we go every 15 minutes, we go to Wufoo and say, hey, Wufoo, what's new since the last time I talked to you? And sometimes it might come back and with a post that's like, oh, there's no new data. If there's no new data, then nothing happens. And this happens every 15 minutes again. We go talk to that, to Wufoo's computers. We ask Wufoo's computers, do you have any new data? And it comes back yes or no. If there is new data, Zapier takes all of that new data that's come in that 15-minute interval and posts it, just like, again, we're using our API lingo here, posts it over to the Action app or the second app that you want to integrate that with. Facebook goes out every 15 minutes, looks and sees that I have a new Instagram post that I want to send to Facebook, brings that back and posts it to Facebook. And that is, in essence, how that works on almost a human level, right? So we go look for something. It's either there or if it's not. If it's there, the computer gives it to us. If it's not, we just wait. And we can continue to make those GET requests, or we can ask that computer over and over and over again And that's why it's so beautiful that a computer does it for us. You know, we don't have to go look for that. We as the human don't have to go look for that new information. Hey, in the last 15 minutes, has anyone filled out my form? Or, hey, in the last 15 minutes, has anyone signed up for my event? Or anything like that. Because the API exists, the computer will just automatically do that for us. So we can go on about our business, which is far more important than doing those sort of manual tasks of, you know, the kid equivalent of, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? The computer is just going to do that for us. So to really sort of tie this up and break it down, this is what it comes down to as far as Zapier is concerned, but then again, as far as what an API does is concerned. So when someone fills out my form, so this is a form I have on a landing page, I got an email address, a little text box for them. So when someone fills this out, the Wufoo computer is going to tell Zapier that that happened, and then the Zapier computer is going to connect that to the Google Sheets computer and send that information over to the Google Sheet. So I don't have to do that. The computer does it, and it just goes out over and over and over and over again and asks, like I said, at that really specific interval, just like you would if you were curious if something was out there, except this remembers to do it. Goes out, asks if there's data, sees that there's data, and then matches it up to that other application that you want to get that data into, and automatically fills it in there. So I think that's a really sort of easy visualization of how an API works from a human standpoint. So again, instead of us having to constantly go and ask and ask and ask and ask, the computer can do that all in the background, and then maybe once a day or once every couple of hours, we come to our spreadsheet and we see, oh, you know, people have been filling out my form, or maybe this is your CRM, how you keep up with your contacts, or your email marketing list. You know, you can connect your form, and the API will connect to, you know, on the backside will connect to your email marketing platform. And anytime anyone fills out your form, those two computers will talk to each other, and they'll automatically send that email address over to your email marketing list. So you don't have to do it. You don't have to have an intern do it. No one has to do it. The computer just does it itself. And that's all really what an API does, is just the way for those two computers to talk to each other, to get information, and to send information back and forth to kind of keep everything up to date. And I think that is it. All my slides.
Great, Alison. Thank you. I think we have some questions. Do you want to? You have to come up here and ask the question now. Yeah. So we have some questions. That was good. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome.
I'm going to let someone come and sit down and ask the question. You can use my little computer microphone.
Okay, Alison, it's Bill Courtwright.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
Good. How are you? So
I'm well, thank you.
Perhaps somewhat of a naive question, but so I was looking at your website and I was looking at use cases, and I just thought I would give you an example of a use case from your site. So you were talking about taking a post from WordPress and automatically pushing it out to a Facebook page, which is something I think my clients would find useful. But I think normally the way I would do that is I would go look for a plugin, plug it into their environment, and just use that plugin. How does Zapier fit into that picture?
To me, as far as I'm concerned, Zapier is not a replacement for that. Zapier is just more of a complement to that. So if there are other automations that you wanted to run, whether that be accounting or project management or any other sort of way that you wanted to move data around from one app to another, that's what Zapier is better suited for. We have tons of people who use Zapier for that specific use case, but that's mainly because they're already using Zapier for something else, and they're like, oh, I can do this too, so instead of using that plugin, I'm just going to do this because I'm already in here and it's an easier thing to do.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, okay, great. So I guess we do have a question from Sabrina.
Hey, Sabrina. So is there,
Okay.
is there
No, it's fine.
any need for security around all this?
What's that?
Is there any need for security around moving all the data around?
You know, that's an interesting argument that I don't know if you'd get the same answer from any two people. The data is as safe as it can be. We don't store it personally. Well, we store it for 7 days, but that's only for accounting, not physical accounting purposes. But if something went wrong in that 7-day window, we could go figure out why. Once that 7-day window is passed, we actually don't have the data anymore. But I think, you know, there's a lot of different arguments for is connecting an application with your username and password safe. You know, there's a lot of arguments out there around that, and I think webhooks is going to make that a lot safer. And there's such a need for that security blanket, so to speak, of, you know, this is as safe as it can be, that we'll see that sort of get better and better and better. You know, nothing is 100% safe. We've seen, you know, I'm sure Target and all those people can attest to that. But we do go extremely far out of our way to make sure that data is as safe as it can be, for sure.
Great, thank you. I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Ann. That was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
So what is the adaption curve now for webhooks? Because that seems like a much better, having worked with a lot of JSON and XML and files, and it's kind of clunky and slow.
Yep. Yep.
What is the adaption for webhooks? Are people coming up to speed on it?
Yeah, you know, it's getting better, I think. I can name a few apps off the top of my head that use it. The one that comes to mind mostly is an app called Unbounce, which I actually really love. I did a webinar with them last week, and they do strictly webhooks. The problem with webhooks is that it's not the easiest concept for people to understand. Even like I said, I struggle with it sometimes, and our entire support team struggles with it sometimes. But even from a user standpoint, like, it's so much easier for a user to say username and password for this account. Totally get that. But it's quite another and PayPal works this way too. PayPal works on webhooks. It's quite another to say, okay, we've got this URL. Now we need you to go paste this URL in this very specific spot. And that's, it sounds easy. Like, it came out of my mouth. I'm like, actually, that sounds kind of easy. But in practice, it's not the easiest thing in the world, and every app handles it a little differently. So I do think that it will become the most ubiquitous way of handling data via API, because honestly, it is so much easier and quicker since it's instantaneous. And you also don't necessarily have the security concerns of usernames and passwords and API keys and things like that. I haven't seen quite the adoption on it that I thought we would, but I think we're still pretty early in the game, and I imagine in the next 5 years it will become more and more ubiquitous, and we'll see kind of JSON and XML really sort of fade out.
Great, thank you. Well, that was a wonderful presentation. I know myself, I'm not so afraid of APIs anymore. So I understand what they do. Any more questions before we wrap it up here? Oh, Chris does. Come on, 1 second.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Alison. So, question: What are some of the different apps that Zapier can connect up with?
That's a loaded question. Let me. Because I'm a nerd about this stuff, let me find. I'm going to share my screen, and I will find the list, because I think it's really, it makes me happy to show it off, because it's so long. But so this is all of the apps that Zapier connects with, and like I said, we're over 450 now. So really, just about anything you can think of, you can connect with. All, you know, here's WordPress. All of your social, you know, subjects are here. Just about any CRM you can think of. Gravity Forms, again, big WordPress thing. We even get really, really technical. So if you're doing any database work, we've got MySQL connections. If you're doing e-commerce, there's PayPal, Shopify, tons of email marketing. You know, imagine trying to remember all these off the top of your head. It's a good day when I can remember like 20 of them. But even cool things like if you guys have never played around with Duxboard or Geckoboard, there's some really cool like data visualization things you can do. But really, and I know this sounds like a line, but I use Zapier all day, every day. It really powers like everything that I do, mainly because I have so many tedious things in my day. At Mailgun, I use this one. This sends email for us. So anytime anyone, I do webinars every week. Anytime anyone signs up for a webinar, that form pushes right over to Mailgun and automatically sends them a welcome email. So there's so many different things that you can do. And on the outset, it's really intimidating. Like again, like I said, I've been doing this for a long time, and sometimes even I look at this list and I'm like, I can't deal. It's too much. But if you break down your tasks and things that you do on a daily basis that just drive you bonkers, I imagine there's some sort of connection we can make there. I was having a chat with the Evernote folks. Not Evernote, I'm sorry, Eventbrite. See, this is what happens. There's so many apps. And they were telling me that one of their users told them they were able to not necessarily eliminate an internship, but take an internship which was solely inputting of people who registered for their events into like their CRM and their and spreadsheets and stuff. They completely automated that, and then that intern was able to they were spending all of their time doing those tasks, and then that intern could go out and do other things that were event oriented and people oriented and things that they actually wanted to be doing, and let the computer kind of do all the tedious tasks for them. So again, the list is very, very long, but I imagine there's something in there for everybody.
Great.
Thank you.
Hey, Alison, it's Sabrina again. So I have a question on your pricing plans.
Sure.
Pricing plans? Yeah, so if you could kindly, like, there's free and basic, so we get a sense of what 5 zaps mean and 100 taps.
Yeah, I had told Stacy earlier this week that I wanted to stay as far away from a sales pitch as possible. So no. So I didn't include any of that lingo in my thing because I got so fired up about APIs. But so a zap is the one-to-one connection between apps. So in that Wufoo to Google Sheets example, that would be one zap. So if you're saying one form sending to one spreadsheet, that's a zap. Anytime we go look for data and send it over to another app, that's a task. So that's really how the system is broken down. How many one-to-one connections you need and how many times you think you're going to need us to go look for data and send it to another app.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any more questions? No. Okay, thank you so much, Alison. That was really great. Really, I think all of us are sitting thinking, now what can we do next with Zapier? So I appreciate it.
Yeah. And again, it's a never-ending process, trust me. So if anyone needs anything, I should have put a contact slide up there, but because my email address is a little convoluted, but my email address is alison.groves@zapier.com, and that's just one L, so alison.groves@zapier.com. Please feel free to email me anytime. I'm more than happy to answer questions, maybe talk through workflows, whatever you might need. Happy to do it. I love talking to people is my favorite thing. So anything anyone needs, feel free to reach out anytime. I'm happy to chat.
Oh, great, because I tried doing a zap on Twitter that when anyone mentions hashtag WP WordPress and then says a tutorial, that I get an email, but I haven't they're not working. So I'll have to go back and play with it again. And
yeah. In that instance, the best thing to do is actually email contact@zapier.com, because that goes to our entire team, literally. And whoever is on call at that moment in time can actually look into your account and see what exactly might be going wrong. I imagine it's just one little tweak that needs to be made to kind of get that up and running. But we use that sort of general email address so that we get coverage at all times and that anyone that's around can help out and make sure that we get people taken care of. So.
And that was contact@zapier.com?
Yep.
Great.
Yep. And we're a completely distributed company, so I've got teammates in Spain and Thailand, and so we're trying to get really good about being a 24/7 company. So
Okay, thank you. Well, great. Thanks a lot. And I think I'll
That's so nice.
thank you. And I'll stop the broadcast and I'll send you the link to it if you don't automatically get it. So if you want to edit it and use it also for Zapier.
Oh, that'd be great.
Okay, good. Thanks, Allison.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.